It was a typical evening when the first cracks in my relationship with Mark began to show. We had been married for 7 years, and our life together was stable, almost predictable. We didn't fight often, and when we did, it was never anything too serious. Mark's best friend, Daniel, had always been a part of our life. He and Mark had been inseparable since college, and over the years, Daniel had become like family to me. He was someone I trusted and had no reason to feel uncomfortable around. That all changed when I began to notice things about him I had never noticed before. At first, the changes were subtle. Daniel started coming over more often, even when Mark wasn't home. I didn't think much of it at first. He was Mark's best friend, after all. But then, his visits started to feel different. He wasn't just popping by to chat anymore. He'd stay longer, linger a bit too long in conversation. I could see him watching me, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my skin crawl. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid, or maybe I was too tired. But deep down, I knew something was off. Then came the compliments. They started out innocently enough. "You look great today," he'd say, or "Mark's a lucky guy." But as time went on, the compliments grew more personal, more intense. One evening, when I was making dinner in the kitchen, he walked in and leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving me. "You're stunning, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how Mark keeps his hands off you." I froze. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to laugh it off or say something, but I knew in that moment that something had changed. "Thanks, Daniel," I said, trying to force a smile, but the words felt hollow. His gaze didn't move, and for a brief moment, I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. But I didn't know what to do. He was Mark's best friend, and I didn't want to overreact. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just a harmless compliment, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's behavior grew more persistent. He started calling me more often, checking in when Mark wasn't around. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just friendly gestures, a sign that he cared. But each time he did it, it felt more and more like he was trying to get closer. He would make excuses to be around, showing up at the house even when Mark was at work. I tried to brush it off, but I could feel myself getting more and more uncomfortable. Then came the night that everything changed. Mark had gone out with some colleagues, and Daniel came over, as he often did. We started talking, but this time, something felt different. His usual jokes were replaced with remarks that felt loaded with meaning. He complimented my looks again, but this time, his words were more deliberate, more direct. "You know, Sarah, you're really something special," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Mark doesn't appreciate you enough." I didn't know how to respond. His words hit me harder than I expected. There wasn't just a compliment anymore. It felt like a subtle invitation, a hint of something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I tried to steer the conversation away, but he persisted. "You deserve someone who sees how incredible you are," he said, moving closer to me. My heart began to race, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Daniel, I think you should go," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't appropriate." But he didn't leave. He stood there, close enough for me to feel his breath on my skin, close enough to make my pulse quicken. He leaned in as if to kiss me, and for a moment, I froze. My mind was screaming at me to move, to push him away, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend what was happening. Finally, I managed to step back, retreating to the other side of the room. My heart was racing, and I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do, but I knew this was wrong, so wrong. When Mark returned home later that evening, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He sat down, laughing and joking as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just been cornered by his advances. The guilt and confusion settled in. What had just happened? Why had Daniel crossed that line, and why had I done nothing to stop it? I felt trapped, caught between my loyalty to Mark and the betrayal I felt from his best friend. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep, trying to process everything that had occurred. The following day, I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I needed to confront Mark. I needed to tell him what had happened, to make him understand the gravity of the situation. I didn't know how to say it, but I knew I had to. I waited until that evening when Mark and I were alone, sitting on the couch, and I finally blurted it out. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something." "It's about Daniel," I began, my voice shaky. He tried to kiss me last night." Mark looked at me, his expression confused at first. "What do you mean?" "Are you sure?" he asked, clearly not understanding the weight of what I was saying. "Yes, Mark, I'm sure. He's been making advances toward me for weeks now. He's been coming over more often, making inappropriate comments, and last night, he actually tried to kiss me." Mark stared at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. "That's ridiculous. Daniel would never do that," he said. "You're overreacting." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Overreacting? You don't get it, Mark? He's been making me uncomfortable for weeks, and you're just going to brush it off like it's nothing? I could feel my anger building, but I wasn't sure if it was aimed at Daniel or at Mark for not seeing the truth. Mark's face hardened. "I don't know what's going on, but you're making a big deal out of nothing. Daniel's my best friend. I trust him." His words cut deeper than I expected, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I felt alone, trapped in a marriage where my feelings didn't seem to matter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. My trust in Mark, my trust in Daniel, everything felt shattered. I realized that the situation wasn't just about Daniel's advances. It was about Mark's inability to see the betrayal right in front of him. The next few days were tense. Daniel continued to act as though nothing had happened, and Mark seemed to defend him at every turn. It was as if I was the one in the wrong for even bringing it up. I felt like I was losing everything, the trust one had in Mark, the bond one had with Daniel. I didn't know how to move forward, how to fix something that felt broken beyond repair. Finally, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep living in this toxic atmosphere, and I couldn't stay with a man who would ignore my feelings so easily. One evening, after another fight with Mark about the situation, I made a decision. I grabbed my things and walked out the door, determined to find a way to reclaim my life. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Free from the suffocating tension, free from the betrayal. I didn't know where my life was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in a marriage where my voice didn't matter, where my boundaries were ignored. I would rebuild, I would find myself again, and I would never let anyone take away my peace. Mark and Daniel's friendship was shattered, and so was the life we had built together. I couldn't look back anymore. My future was mine to shape, and I was done letting anyone else control it.